cat over here. Look at this cat. She may be there for the entire video. What is going on, everybody? Tonka here. Let's get this out of the way right now. I was not a community manager. I was an event specialist that worked on a community team. While I believe a lot of what I did, and the vast majority of what I did, could be classified as a community manager, my official title was an event specialist. So let's just make sure that's clear. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about community management, specifically in the games industry. One of the most common questions that I get is if I would ever return to being a community manager. Frankly, that question is just too hard for me to answer. A lot of the things that I personally don't like about being a community manager, someone else may actually really enjoy about it. So I'm going to bring up a few topics to talk about within the community management role, and I'm going to do my very best to give an unbiased opinion on both the negatives and the positives of those topics. The first topic I want to talk about is the ambiguity of the community manager role. A lot of people assign the task of forum moderation as a pillar of community management. And while that's true some of the time, it's not true all of the time. If you've never worked as a community manager, expect to, as the corporate saying goes, wear a lot of hats. That was me putting on a hat. Maybe I should actually have a hat to do that with. Now, what I mean by this is in one company, you may report to a manager that is under the customer service org. And then in another company, you may report to a manager who's under the marketing department. Obviously, who you report to and under what organization is very important. The objectives of marketing and the objectives of customer service are largely the same. They want happy customers. However, the two branches may not agree on how to get happy customers. So one company, a community manager is someone that may be engaging with their player base on social media and to have a better brand presence on social media. Now, that can usually be classified as a social media manager, but community managers are commonly doing that, especially in small companies. And now to another company, the most important job for a community manager is to have their pulse on the opinions of the community. They're in charge of advocating for the customer and then presenting objective feedback to the company in order to push for better service. Now, don't get me wrong, a lot of community managers have to do both of those things, as well as many other tasks. The ambiguous nature of the community manager means that you may sign up to be a community manager at a company and end up doing something that you don't even care about. You're not passionate about it, so you feel like you've been led astray. On the other side of this, though, the ambiguity of the community manager role is really exciting for some people. You get to kind of dip your toe into all different kinds of things within the company, and your role is ever changing. You're representing the company every single time that you interact with a player. But because you're doing that, you better understand what you're talking about. And that leads me into my next topic, the player advocate. Now, if you like a challenge, being the player advocate is possibly one of the most challenging things you can do in your professional life. I've definitely talked about this before, but a very important skill for community managers is the ability to distill feedback. Let me give you some examples. Example 1, a member of your community creates a very large, incredibly well-written piece of feedback about a core aspect of your game. They share that feedback on Reddit, and many players respond and agree with the player. So now you have a lot of people talking about a negative part of your game that needs attention. Is that feedback useful? Absolutely. That kind of feedback is the best type of feedback. You love that feedback. But let me give you another example. A player goes onto your forums and says, in all caps, this game is crap. The PvP is so broken. I'm quitting. Exclamation point, tons of exclamation points, all caps. Now, usually those kind of posts are not going to get a lot of positive responses. So what you're going to start to see in the responses in there is, can I have your stuff? Don't let the door hit you on the way out. You mad, bro? Yada, 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 those kind of responses, right? But is that feedback valuable? It actually is, yes. As a player advocate, the goal is to get to a point where the feedback provided by your player base has a clear statement. In the first example, the player did all the work for you. You didn't really even have to do anything. You could just take that chunk and send it off to production and send it off to anybody who's relevant to this conversation and say, hey, you should check this out. This is a really good topic on Reddit. But in the second example, it's just somebody blowing off some steam. That player boiled over. Now, perhaps that player is going to cool off and they'll come back and then you'll be able to talk to them a little bit, but they might just be gone. They might have just left, and that was it. And the point is, that player was so upset, so angry and frustrated that they needed an outlet to blow off their steam. Many people would see that second example and say, it's not helpful, just move along, just close the thread, get rid of it, dump it. Now, I would implore a lot of people to actually reach out to this player, See if you can find out what happened exactly. I want to understand what made this person boil over. I want to understand what made this person basically yell at our company. And perhaps that won't work. And many times it won't. Sometimes they're angry about something that you can't control. But the point is you still want to hear that customer. You still want to gather that feedback. That becomes incredibly difficult when there's a just angry review of your company, of your game, or of you personally. And the first thing, the natural response is to defend. But it's really important for your community to feel like they can vent to you, because otherwise you'll never get real feedback. If your player base can't vent to you without the fear of getting the ban hammer, then you're not going to ever really hear what they truly feel. You have to be able to distill that feedback. You have to remove those personal insults, and you have to find the underlying reason for those negative emotions. Sometimes you're not going to find any substance at all, but sometimes you'll find some of the most valuable feedback. You take all that information that you've gathered, you remove the personal attacks from it, you remove a lot of the emotion from it, and then you can share it with teams. This allows an open dialogue internally, and you can now properly represent the player or the players to your company. Just because somebody's raging doesn't mean their opinion is wrong. This is really difficult to do, especially when they're personally attacking you. You are the face of the company to your player base. And that leads me into my next topic. You are the face of the company to your players. In a lot of cases, this is actually kind of literal, especially on social media when you're running like a Facebook or a Twitter handle and you're in charge of it. Somebody tweets at you and you respond as game company. You respond as World of Warcraft, or you respond as the company. You respond as EA. Obviously, this topic is not as black and white as I want it to be for the sake of simplicity in this video. And honestly, being a public figure is really exciting. For me, I got photoshopped onto BAMs, I got squirted in the face by the CEO of our company, I got to do voiceover work, I got included in yearly recap videos, all kinds of things. I got to be involved in so many things just because I was a familiar face. But when being the face of the company becomes a major problem is when things are not so good. You don't only get to be the face of the company during good times. You have to be the face of the company during bad times as well. Every time you mess up the rules to a PvP tournament, or every time the company makes a mistake, every server crash, every network issue, every buggy patch, you're there. And it becomes even harder when, and I promise you this will happen, when the community is, say, up in arms about a change or perhaps a lack of change. If some other people within the company or another company that you're working with decide to do something that is not seen as favorable by the player base, you don't get to be like, yeah, I totally agree with you guys who are raging on the forums about this change. I agree with you, but it's bullcrap. Like, they chose it. I didn't choose this. Like, you can't do that. You have to advocate on behalf of your company because that's your job. And what that turns you into in a lot of cases is, well, a punching bag. This is hard enough when you know a policy or a decision is going to be received poorly, but you personally, as the community manager, agree with the decision. You think it's going to be better overall for the company and for the customer base. This becomes even more difficult when the player base is upset about something and you agree with them and disagree with your own company or someone else making the decisions, but you still have to represent your company. You're not always going to see eye to eye with your company, and you're not always going to see eye to eye with the player base. These kind of things are going to happen. You need to also be able to make your company's motives clear to the player base. For example, if the end game is getting stale, or items in game are a little too pricey, or there's a major bug affecting the player base, you have to be able to speak to all of those points as a point of authority. And you have to be able to do this at any time. Now, obviously, you're going to receive help from people in your company that represent different parts. You're going to get help from QA when you don't understand a bug entirely and what we're doing to fix it, kind of thing. But you need to be able to speak to just about everything. Company atmosphere, marketing promotions, all the way down to how bug reports are handled internally. And this can be really tricky since, you have a full-time job. How are you supposed to be an expert on everything, including other people's jobs? Well, that brings me into the next topic. You have endless possibilities as a community manager. Being a CM can be so much fun. You get to goof around with the player base. You get to come up with events, talk with marketing about new strategies. You get to work with corporate partners, plan conventions, understand a bug, speak directly to game developers, and many other things. And for me, by far, personally, my favorite thing was when you have distilled that player feedback that we talked about from earlier, passed that information on, and then you see the fruits of your work and of the community's ability to communicate with you. And then you see a change happen to the game or to a policy for good. Now, going back to the first topic I really talked on is the ambiguity of the role. That means you get to really experience a little bit of everything. And that's a major positive. It's difficult, it's challenging, but it's so rewarding. I have never worked in a role that has allowed me to be so endlessly creative. Planning and executing the PvP tournaments as a small company was incredibly time consuming. It was difficult. And it was, at times, it felt impossible. I didn't know if we were going to be able to do it. And while I wouldn't say that we were perfect in any way, they were so much fun. The stress, the planning, the execution, I will never forget those. Being a community manager, or in my case, working on a community team, it can be the most rewarding job in the world. But you have to deal with quite a bit, and you have to have the right mindset to get there. I hope some of the topics that I covered help people out there who are thinking about becoming a community manager or want to understand my thoughts on community management. Hopefully this video helps you out. Now, with all that said, I'd like to leave you with this. As a community manager, oh, the places you'll go. You will work with QA, you will play alpha builds, you will chat with producers and bring feedback to Stilled. You'll be a game expert because you have the brains. You know every tool, all marketing campaigns. Whatever you do, you'll be loved so great. Whatever you do, you will never get hate. Except when you do. Because sometimes you will. I'm sorry to say, but sadly it's true, that negativity and meltdowns can happen to you. So don't get hung up in the personal attack. The feedback's important. Just try and relax. I love you all. Tonka out.